then we have our second presentation followed by discussion, and then we can also have an overall discussion about how the two papers speak to each other. But we felt we needed to break up the two presentations because they are both rich, and by having one after the other, not only does the audience get too many heavy-duty thoughts in one go, but somehow one paper, perhaps the last one because it's the most recent, gets a lot more attention than the first one. So to prevent that, let's have a discussion in between as well. Afia Zia, who we all know as a friend and activist, an author, has a master's in women's studies from the University of York, England, and is currently pursuing her PhD from the Women and Gender Studies Institute, University of Toronto, Canada. She's the author of 2 books and edited several volumes on women in Pakistan. She's also got 9 peer-reviewed articles in various journals. She's actively involved in debates around women and Islam or secular feminism or otherwise. Afia writes a lot in the newspapers also. Without much ado, Afia, the title of Afia's paper is Secular Feminism Irreligious and Islamic Feminism Divine?
Thank you so much, Sabha. Thanks to the Center for the invitation to be here, and specifically thanks to Alia and Saad for handling all the logistics to get me here. Special thanks to Farzana Bari, who along with Rubina Sehgal and Sabah Gul Khattak have consistently recognized my small contribution to the feminist movement, and they've been unfaltering in their support and encouragement all the way. So thanks to them. So there's been some documentation of the historical political debates on secular and faith-based approaches to women's rights in Pakistan. My work over the last 8 years has tracked new developments on secular and Islamic feminisms and on the more recent post-secular challenges that have come up in the post-9/11 era. Thoda sa to post dalna padega isme. My paper today will offer some quick summaries of these and then an analysis of the implications of all these various streams for the women's movement in Pakistan. Now, it could be said that the narrative on secular possibilities for Pakistan began most formally around the discussions and the drafting of the Munir report, Munir and Kayani in 1954. But with reference to the women's movement, the resistance of women's groups to Ziaul Haq's Islamization of the state and society in 1979 onwards may be compared to the French concept of secularism or laicity. Let me immediately clarify, because we know there are many different models of secularism and secularization around the world, but loosely, laicity can be described as a process of disengagement from and struggle pitted against the church, which aims to cleanse the republic from the symbols and politics of religion. So just very loosely. Now, I'm not suggesting that Pakistani secularists refer to this model of secularism or to some treaty of Westphalia imaginary, nor do secularists in Pakistan consciously follow the concept of laicity in its original radical form. In fact, many Pakistani feminists have been critical of the shortcomings of laicity after the banning of the niqab or the face veil by the French Republic in 2004, and of course the more recent controversy over the burqi. But simply for analytical comparison, because I get asked a lot, what is secular feminism in Pakistan? And in fact, there's a funny story because a few years ago, I was speaking at the University of Cambridge in England on the relevance and contributions of secular feminism in Pakistan. And Humaira Iqtidar, who had just done a PhD from there, was in that fairly small audience, and she challenged my arguments, and she said with some institutional authority, what's secular feminism? There is no secular feminism in Pakistan. And before I could reply, a hand and a voice cropped up from the back of the very small room and said, in objection, excuse me, there are secular feminisms in Pakistan and there are secular feminists in Pakistan. I am one of them. So apparently one of the early members of Women's Action Forum, who was doing some fellowship at Cambridge, who objected, and it was almost like I had embedded her there for that effect. But anyway, as a point of analytical comparison, I suggest that Ziaul Haq set up the Pakistani state as a church, and the struggle of the liberal progressive women's movement was pitted against this theocratic, state-driven attempt to reverse women's achievements and rights, and in order to showcase the state's Islamic credentials. In response, the women's movement turned its direction from a liberal equal rights framing to a quintessentially and additionally secular resistance project. Now, usually the touchstone reference for Pakistani laicity has been the 1973 Constitution, and which many believe upheld the principles of a secular state, albeit compromised and negotiated in subsequent amendments. So technically, the struggle has not been against any given church in Pakistan, but theocratic institutions such as the Council of Islamic Ideology and the codification of the Islamic laws under the Hudud Ordinances of 79, and the empowerment of a hand-picked state clergy and religious institutions and policies. All these have been consistently challenged. I'll return to secular feminism in a while, but let me turn to a brief summary of Islamic feminism. Mahbub Badran, gender studies specialist who focuses on the Middle East and Islamic societies. She compares secular feminism's emergence in the form of a social movement with Islamic feminism, which burst onto the global scene in the late 20th century in the form of a discourse. And both are concerned with gender rights, but the difference between activist and discursive histories has split feminists in Muslim contexts on the issue and the worth and priorities of a strategic gender politics that is based on faith. This is important because several of us, as secularists, have always questioned the evidentiary success of strategies of working within the religious framework, and we remain unconvinced of the material or tangible value despite the attraction of the discursive possibilities of faith-based approaches. Primarily an Iranian diasporic project, Islamic feminism seeks the compatibility of Islam and feminism through lobbying for legal reform within the framework of the Islamic Republic. And there's lots of literature and critiques also that are available on this. Currently, there is no identifiable Islamic feminist movement in Pakistan, although there are individuals within collectives who may be politically drawn to the concept. There are some feminists too who may participate in secular activism and who resist political Islamization of state and society, but they would not advocate for voiding a faith-based approach to women's personal empowerment. It is also important to remember that the self-acclaimed secular women's movement in Pakistan has for the most part not resisted Islam, just an Islamic state and clerical authority. If anything, one of the critiques of the Secular Women's Action Forum has been that despite taking such a radical political stand as demanding a secular state, many of its own members dilute this by accommodating Islamist feminist approaches in their professional work, and most of the critique has come from me. This has compromised, I argue, the secular feminist project and allowed Islamist forces, particularly this thing called empowered women's pietist movements, to strengthen their activism without any real secular political resistance, particularly at societal levels. The works of Sadaf Ahmed, Farhat Haq and Neelam Hussain have confirmed the patriarchy strengthening within these pietist movements in their studies. Okay, so there are four broad concerns with Islamic feminism as I see. The first, as Badran has argued, the shift from secular feminism to Islamic feminism in Muslim context has made feminist possibilities more communal. This communalism has not come from conservative male quarters, but she says is being fed from within the world of feminism. Badran gives the example of Musawa, which is a transnational organization created and run by and for Muslim women, and which focuses on reforming Muslim family laws. Her argument is that secular feminism in Muslim context used to be a holistic feminism which incorporated the rights of Muslims and non-Muslims, but now it seems only Muslim women's communal needs have become the new era, have become the new area of feminist politics and funding. And I suppose in non-Muslim context, one could call it a provincialism of feminism. Second, my own work agrees that Islamic feminism may trouble patriarchal religion in theory, but there seems no clarity as to the nature of the relationship of such a discourse with the modern Islamic State, its laws or policies beyond family laws. In too many ways, the focus on symbolic achievements by Islamic feminism is reminiscent of the 1980s when women attempted to fight patriarchy within an equally patriarchal Islamic discourse. So today, a kind of neo-political religious feminism has captured the imagination in a more symbolic, sometimes confrontational, mostly by stealth and rewarding manner than any other stream. Third, since both Islamism and feminism are political perspectives, it is my observation that in this hybrid formation, the feminist agenda is getting diluted while the Islamic factor is increasingly accommodating patriarchal possibilities. Fourth, lastly, and most importantly for me, the anthropological interest generated around Islamic feminism has also engaged the attention of the neoliberal social development sector, not to mention the capitalist markets that have tremendously profited from Islamic products and consumerism. The combination of scholarly interest and funded support for Islamic feminism has impacted feminism in general and secular feminism specifically. Now, before I discuss these implications, I do want to introduce the third vertex of this triangle, which is the emergence of a post-secularist body of work produced by Pakistani scholars, mostly diasporic. So in the post-9/11 era, a cohort of Pakistani scholars, nearly all diaspora and based in Western academies, have produced a body of work which is heavily influenced by the works of Talal Asad, Saba Mahmood, Leila Abu Lahoud and others. In these works, religious agency rather than secular autonomy has become a substitutive and almost exclusive tool of analysis for understanding Muslim women, and usually at the cost of their working class identities. Here are some examples of recent Pakistani post-secular proposals emerging from Western academia and shaping the current women and Islam discourse. So one example I've already mentioned here is the work of Humaira Al-Qadar, who has theorized from Cambridge that it is Islamists, not secularists, who can act as authentic agents of appropriate secularization in countries such as Pakistan, especially Jamaat-e-Islami and Jamaat-ul-Dawah. Another is the work of Masooda Bano at Oxford University. She has multiple publications advocating that Islamists are rational believers who can benignly instrumentalize Islam towards social development. She has developed dozens of policy papers for the British government, which include the proposal that female Islamic leadership, even if it conforms with male Islamist orthodoxy, is a viable, competitive alternative to Western feminism. A third example is found in the work of Sadaf Aziz, who has argued that Islamic legal regimes are viable alternatives to the unworkable Occidental or Western secularization that we must reject. Those who defend Sadaf Aziz argue she's not advocating Islamist laws, but inviting secular activists to, quote, consider carefully the arguments for Islamic laws without prejudging their efficacy. It's interesting phraseology, but the women's movement in Pakistan has been all too familiar with the efficacy of the zina laws and their tremendous popularity between the Islamic State and Muslim men. More interestingly, Aziz and her colleagues, their arguments have been that the zina laws and child marriage cannot be challenged by secular or universal alternatives for our Muslim context. A theory that has been debunked quite effectively by recent fairly radical legislation on both these issues. Aziz is currently studying the Pakistani constitution at SOAS in a very different way from how Shaila Zia did. The defense of these scholars is always that it is merely studying or teaching us to look at issues from another perspective, because we are all quite myopic and westernized and non-nuanced, and as if research itself is an apolitical and disinterested endeavor in itself. Fourth, Moin Chima and Shahzad Akbar, because how can men be left out of the women in Islam debate, they argue that moral rewards can emerge from Islamic readings of all financial and political legal cases, especially for the poor and disenfranchised people of Pakistan. Fifth, the highly influential work of Saba Mahmood on Muslim women's piety has challenged liberal and secular feminisms as imperialist impositions on believing women who may wish to embrace docility, submission, conservatism, patriarchy, and Islamism. She redefines agency, and she displaces it from the goals of liberal and feminist emancipatory politics. So, okay, all these academic positionings and projects, they require a clearing of space first. And this is achieved by discrediting secularists and feminists as those who are complicit with imperialism, as pro-drone and anti-Islam. And this has been enabled by the writings and polemics offered by yet another set of scholars located also in Western academia, and which include the names such as Saadia Toor, Amna Akbar, Rupal Oza, Nadia Tahir, and several men who claim a left identity, mostly online and in cyberspace, but they still claim that identity. In their eyes, and strangely, as late as in 2016, the Pakistani state is targeting, quote, working class and low middle class, religious-minded Pakistanis who are harassed and sometimes forcibly disappeared simply for being poor practicing Muslims and therefore suspect. This is Mehwish Ahmed and Nadia Tahir in the news. Now, I'm not sure what the motivating impulse of the Pakistani state used to be before the war on terror, when it persecuted these same Muslim men, practicing or not. I'm not even sure how this analysis applies to the targeted citizens of Karachi and Balochistan today, who are really not great practitioners of religion, but apparently this is all new revelatory stuff. This compounding of class and practicing Muslims, the compounding of class and practicing Muslims is deliberate. And while it's crude, I think jihadist groups in South Punjab would welcome such sympathetic analysis and find it actually quite useful. In any case, by now you can make up the process by which the replacement of analytical categories. Earlier social scientific analysis tended to focus on class identities. It is being replaced with an overwhelmingly anthropological interest and framing of the subjectivities and beliefs of Islamists, particularly women. The question that can be asked over here is, what's the problem with that? Okay, using the same examples, Humaira Iqtidar in her work on secularizing Islamists argues, by bringing religious belief into the public sphere and recognizing it as a motivating factor, this trend is secularizing Muslim societies such as Pakistan, and our Islamist political parties are true harbingers of an authentic, if accidental, secularization. Iqtidar's defenders say she's not arguing that Islamists facilitate secularism, but that there is a difference between the social process of secularization and the political program of secularism, and the social process may proceed independent of the political program. All this is fine, it's sexy academic theory for Western audiences in particular, but the trouble is that Iqtidar developed her thesis at exactly the same time as the 5-year rule of the religious alliance of the Muttahida Majlis-e-Amal in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, exactly the same time. So her total silence and aversion to using the living examples of Islamists and their secularization of the province is fairly strange. The performances of the Islamists in the provincial and national assemblies between 2002 and 2008 would have provided for very rich evidence and consequences of the social process of an Islamist secularization, and seems an oddly missed opportunity for Iqtidar. The other thing she does is, she compounds the inadequately defined category liberal secular as a hybrid and fixed category to define any collective that opposes Islamist politics in Pakistan. Anyone who challenges Islamist politics is liberal secular. Again, the problem with this is that in fact, religio-nationalist issues, whether they are about drone warfare, whether they are about polygamy, unequal inheritance, they have supporters and opponents that cut across all classes, genders, provinces, and beliefs. So first of all, liberal thought is not the privilege nor the political aspiration of the bourgeoisie or the NGO sector only, as Masouda Hami insists. Secondly, liberals are not, unfortunately, necessarily secularists in Pakistan. They're just mostly opportunists who have repeatedly compromised on secular possibilities when it has mattered the most. These liberals also tend to be ambivalent in their support for secular agendas, despite confidently espousing the cause of a liberal, tolerant and moderate Islam. And as I keep telling Moin Chima and his colleagues, relax, Pakistan is not going to become a liberal, secular, free sex, hegemonic utopia anytime soon. So this post-secularist critique that secularism is purely derived from within the immanent frame of Western liberalism is a myth. In Pakistan, one can comfortably be liberal and modern without advocating secularism or secularizing society. As we know, many secularists, especially in Balochistan and Pakhtunkhwa, are certainly not liberals. Nevertheless, it is impressive how Iqtidar and the others have been riding this wave unchallenged for so long. Okay, so more worryingly, because of this shift in analytical frameworks, acts of violence perpetrated in the name of Islam can no longer be reviewed as a crime, and nor can the impunity extended to such crimes through certain Islamic laws be challenged, because faith-inspired violence is analyzed as simply motivated by and as reactionary to something called imperialism. Religious actors have been rendered as empty or neutral vessels, they're all puppets, and religion has been voided of political resource. It's just some neutral ideology. The objection to Muslim women needing to be rescued has been protested through a defense of Muslim women as equal victims of imperialism in their case. This grafting of racialized discrimination against Muslim men into any conversation on cases of violence against women in Muslim context deflects attention off the act of violence, the motivation, and the impunity offered it through Islamic laws or rationalizations that encourage us to look at it through a religio-cultural prism at best. When the Taliban attacked Malala in 2012, the so-called anti-imperialists kept arguing that this is in revenge for imperialist drone attacks on poor tribal Muslim insurgents. Eventually, the poor Taliban had to issue press releases saying, for heaven's sake, we attacked her for her pursuit of secular education and secularized agenda, not drones. So please be clear on this. All these proposals, they're not just theoretical fantasies, nor are they academic indulgences. In fact, the surplus of studies and research that is emerging from Western academia has marketed Islam as a logical entry point for social development. Those who defend Masouda Banu's thesis that madrasas and Islamic charities have important traction in our society